During a brutal storm, 4 men hold on to their boat for dear life after 13 hours of being lost at sea. They keep repeating a chant about being strong, refusing to give up now. This all started a week ago in Florida. Nick works as a personal trainer at an important training camp, where he befriends NFL players Marquis and Corey. They exercise hard but also have lots of fun by teasing each other. One night, the guys have dinner together with their families. Nick's best friend Will arrives late with bad news: he just lost his job. To cheer him up, his friends invite him to their fishing trip next weekend. On Saturday morning, Will shows up too early and makes noise until Nick leaves the bed. Then he takes over the kitchen to make 40 sandwiches at record speed. Will and Nick leave together for Marquis' home and finally see the boat. It's supposed to hold 11 people, but the duo thinks it looks too small. Marquis' house is a bit of a mess because he's getting things ready to move. He admits he doesn't want to move to Oakland because there's no access to the ocean there, and he can't live without the waves because they feel like home. But he has no choice because of work. After Marquis says goodbye to his family, the group finally leaves. At the pier, they discuss the weather because they heard about an upcoming storm, but they agree they should be back before it reaches this area. They also put their phones in plastic bags to protect them from the water, although they won't have service at sea. Will is a little worried, but Marquis assures him that the boat has a radio. A few hours later, Nick's mother wakes up and watches the news, only to learn about the storm. She tries to call Nick to warn him, but he doesn't hear his phone because the guys are chatting and playing music while they fish. They fish for a while in the same spot before they move deeper into the sea to try a new area. After 4 hours at sea, Corey manages to catch a big fish while Will gets his line stuck on the boat. Nick feels seasick, but when he calms down, he finally understands why Marquis feels so zen at the ocean and gets philosophical. At that moment they start hearing thunder in the distance and notice the sky is getting dark, so they decide it's time to go home. Corey tries to pick the anchor, but it only moves for a few seconds before it gets stuck. The friends try pulling the rope together, but it's still not enough to make the anchor budge. As the thunder gets closer, they tie the rope to the boat and Marquis starts the engine, only for the boat to tilt under the weight of the anchor. Marquis keeps trying by using all the engine's power, and the boat tilts so much that water starts getting in. Yet the anchor still won't move. Suddenly a big wave hits the boat, causing all the guys to fall into the water. They desperately swim in the harsh current until they manage to resurface and discover that their boat has been overturned. Fighting against the waves, the group reaches the boat and works together to try to turn it over, but it won't budge. They try from a different angle to no avail. Will realizes that the anchor may be holding the boat down, so Marquis dives in to get the rope. While the others hold his clothes to keep him close, Marquis rubs the rope on the propeller until it breaks. Then they try to flip the boat again to no avail. After 5 hours, the guys are still holding on to the boat. Marquis remembers that there are life vests in the boat, but it's getting difficult to swim because of his wet clothes. He takes a few layers off while ignoring Nick, who thinks they should keep their clothes on for warmth. Marquis dives in and has to open the hatch to search for the vests. This allows water to enter the boat, and the weight begins bringing it down. The others panic, but thankfully Marquis closes the hatch before the boat sinks and resurfaces with one vest. Will dives next and comes out with the rest of the vests. Then Marquis goes back to bring the flares. Lastly Corey dives in to look for food, but he can't see anything and comes back empty-handed. At that moment the group sees a ship, so they start screaming and light up a flare. Sadly the ship doesn't see them and goes away. The guys try to keep up the mood by teasing each other about the situation. Then Nick dives in using the flare for light and finds the bag with the phones. He brings them to the surface and everyone tries to call 911, but they have no signal. Meanwhile Nick's wife is worried because he hasn't returned and calls his mother. They agree it's time they get some help. At the same time, a cop reaches the pier and finds the abandoned car with the empty boat trailer, so he alerts the Coast Guard. While waiting for news, the wives call each other to stay strong. Back to the group, they're pushed off the boat by the brutal waves. They stay afloat, thanks to the life vests, and swim back, helping each other to climb on the boat. Marquis is starting to feel very cold without his clothes, so Nick reminds him that they have each other and they're strong. At that moment it stops raining and the guys think the storm is finally over. However, a huge wave appears in front of them and throws them off the boat again. For a few minutes they can't see each other or hear anything because of the thunder. Eventually they find each other, but they can't see the boat. After a bit of searching, Corey finally finds it floating nearby and quickly climbs on it so that the others can see him. Marquis says he cut his leg when he fell and needs help to move. Suddenly another wave hits them and throws them underwater again. After some struggle, the guys manage to get back on the boat. By now they've been lost at sea for 10 hours. While Corey tries to give an encouraging speech, Marquis feels really weak and says that if he's meant to die, it has to happen at sea. Nick refuses to accept this and calms him down by making him think about his family, but now Marquis thinks his daughter is there. The guys realize the hypothermia is getting to him, so they surround him and light another flare to keep him warm. It's been 20 hours of being lost at sea and the rain is back. Marquis' body is slipping off the boat, so Will tries to pull him back up. In the struggle, Marquis accidentally punches him and Will falls into the water. Nick quickly helps him climb back while Corey embraces Marquis to keep him still, since his mind is still hallucinating because of the hypothermia. Eventually he ends up slipping off the boat and the others have to work together to bring him back up. At the Coast Guard office, the employees are searching for any SOS messages. The men's wives call them to tell them about the missing group, so the employees realize that the abandoned car belongs to them. Captain Timothy announces that their status is going from alert to distress and their aircraft must go out. The pilots start the search, but they have trouble because there's almost zero visibility and the storm has knocked out their radar. Two of the wives get together to search the boxes for Marquis' old GPS, hoping it'll have the coordinates to his favorite fishing spot. At that moment they get a call from Timothy, who tells them he needs some clue or the pilots will have to come back. Luckily the wives find the GPS just in time and give him the coordinates. Timothy's team checks the system and they learn of a shipwreck in that area, so the wives confirm that the guys talked about seeing that shipwreck during previous trips. Timothy immediately sends the aircraft in that direction. On the boat, the guys tell Marquis to open his mouth and drink the rain. The waves are getting worse by the second and the group keeps sliding off. Corey starts feeling very hot, so Will reminds him that hypothermia messes with their minds and tries to help him breathe. Another wave makes Marquis fall, but he's so sick that he can't swim. Will is thrown off as well and Corey almost follows, but Will quickly climbs back to keep him in place. A panicking Nick jumps into the water to look for Marquis, however it's too dark to see anything and the waves keep pushing him back. Nick has no choice but to return to the boat to avoid drowning, and the three of them yell in frustration and grief as they realize Marquis isn't coming back. Corey gets so crazy that he pushes Will off, yet Will never gives up and comes back to hold him through his sorrow. At that moment the Coast Guard aircraft fly above them, so Nick turns on the flashlight on his phone and the three of them start screaming. The pilots still can't see them and are considering going back, but suddenly a man sees a flash of light in the corner of his eye. The other pilots double check and still see nothing, so they assume it was a reflection on the water and leave. While another wave throws the guys off, the wives receive a call informing them that the search has been called off because of the weather. They'll start again when the storm clears. The wives try to stay positive and hold hands for comfort. In the Coast Guard office, Timothy calls a ship called Tornado for help and the commander immediately wakes up his crew to make them keep an eye out for the boat. By morning, only Nick and Will have managed to climb back on the boat after the last fall. They keep yelling Corey's name but there's no answer. Will points out that Marquis and Corey were stronger than them but didn't make it, so he loses hope for himself. Nick insists he needs to put on some clothes but Will refuses to dive to search the boat, and they end up arguing. Suddenly two sharks start swimming around the boat and the guys panic. They move to the highest spot and realize that the sharks are probably attracted to the fish they caught earlier. When the sharks search the boat, Will's sandwiches come out and start floating. The duo wants to grab them but the sandwiches are too far away and the men can't get in the water because of the sharks. Since they have nothing to do but wait, they try to chat to keep themselves distracted. However, Will brings up heavy subjects like eternity and faith. Nick doesn't consider himself an atheist but he doesn't see the point in praying to the same God that caused this in the first place. When Nick starts ranting with clear anger, Will asks him not to give up on God yet. Nick hugs him and says he isn't giving up on anything, then they start repeating their "We Get Strong" chant. The media starts talking about the missing NFL players and the tornado keeps on searching, but the visibility is poor so the crew can't see much either. Meanwhile, Nick's wife tells his parents that the search has been postponed. His mother is furious and rushes to the Coast Guard office to yell at Timothy, who explains that he can't risk his pilots' lives and promises they'll go out again soon. She wonders if her son is dead and Timothy tells her to trust her gut. Back to Will and Nick, they're thrown off the boat once more and they have to swim against some very savage waves to get back to the boat, only to be pushed again. They return to the boat as fast as possible and Nick gets an idea. He gets in the water to pull at the cables from the engine until they break, then he says they should tie themselves to the boat. Will thinks it's a bad idea because they'll drown, but Nick points out that at this rate they'll drown anyway. They tie the cables around their waists and when another wave hits them, they don't fall. Moments later, a bigger wave manages to throw the guys off the boat, but the cables keep them close so they climb back pretty quickly. At that moment a plane flies by and the duo tries yelling and waving their arms, but they aren't seen and the plane leaves. Nick and Will can feel the despair taking over their minds. A few moments later, Will realizes they've been on the water for 24 hours and wonders why nobody has rescued them. There's some visibility now thanks to the morning sun, so he decides to untie the cable and dive to look for food. He comes back with a bag of pretzels and a drink. At that moment Will sees something in the distance and thinks it's land. Nick tries calling 911 and texting his wife, but he still has no signal. He wonders if they may be hallucinating, but Will points out that two people can't hallucinate the same thing. Since planes have flown by without seeing them, he thinks they should take the risk now. They untie the cables and leave the boat to start swimming toward the supposed land. However, after just a few minutes, they lose sight of both whatever it was they saw in the boat. When they turn around, they realize they can't see each other either. They desperately swim around trying to find anything, and eventually Nick makes it to the boat. Will soon arrives as well and Nick has to help him stay afloat. The storm finally clears, so the tornado and the aircraft continue their search. This time the radars work well. After 30 hours at sea, Nick notices Will has been too quiet and checks on his state of mind. Will admits he's thinking about his funeral and wonders if he'll be there. He lies down as his body starts trembling and thinks about what would have happened if he had gotten married, pointing out that maybe a wife would have made him stay home. As he starts having a breakdown, Will asks Nick to send a message to his parents. However, before he can decide on the message, He starts feeling very hot and tries to jump into the water. A wave hits them while Nick grabs the cables to keep Will close. He even wraps his arms around him to hold him, but Will takes off his vest to free himself. Another wave hits them and Will slides off the boat, so Nick keeps pulling at the cables to try to bring him back. Unfortunately, a third wave comes and pushes Will away, leaving Nick alone and yelling in despair. At the Coast Guard office, Timothy hears that both aircraft came back without results. He tells his team not to lose hope and work hard to find the victims. In the evening, the Tornado crew gives up as well, although two men decide to stay outside a little longer. Nick's wife is losing hope and leaves a message on his voicemail, crying as she talks about their years together. Then she goes outside and lets Nick's mother comfort her. A few hours later, Nick hears a noise and sees the tornado in the distance, but they don't see him. He thinks about his wife and mother to avoid letting disappointment kill his mood. After 42 hours at sea, Nick keeps dreaming about his friends and their deaths. His last specks of hope finally die, so he unties the cables and lies down on the boat, waiting for the end to come. At that moment, the tornado finally sees him and they send out a boat to rescue him. Timothy receives the news on the radio and immediately sends out the aircraft as well. A helicopter soon lowers a stretcher and Nick finally gets to leave the sea safely. The Tornado crew and the Coast Guard celebrate their success while paramedics take care of Nick's injuries. Timothy calls Nick's family and they get to celebrate, but the other wives aren't so lucky. 6 months later, Nick can hear his friend screams every time he is near water. This is based on a true story. The search for the other men continued for several days, but it had to be called off and the victims were declared lost at sea. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you